switched at birth.
On a stormy night, two girls were born in the same hospital, their fate sealed by a terrible mistake. One was born to a wealthy family, the other to a struggling one. A twist of fate, however, caused their lives to be switched. Vivian and Abigail left the hospital as daughters of families they did not belong to. Vivian grew up in a humble home. Her parents, the Obains, worked tirelessly to provide for her. They taught her value of hard work and education. Despite their financial struggle, they loved Vivian deeply and supported her dreams. The Obains had always been poor, but they managed to get by with hard work. They lived in a small two-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood in the city. Vivian's life was filled with love and care, but she knew early on that the world outside was harsh. Abigail, on the other hand, was raised by the Ajimans, a family of wealth and status. She lived in a big mansion in the city. Her every wish was granted by her parents. Abigail was the apple of their eyes, but she was so spoiled. Her every demand was met without question, and she grew up believing that the world revolved around her. The Ajamans had wealth beyond measures, and they made sure Abigail knew it. As the years went by, the difference between Vivian and Abigail became more apparent. Vivian worked hard in school, earning top grades, while Abigail barely paid attention in class. Confident that her family's wealth could secure her future, the two girls eventually found themselves attending the same high status school. Vivian had earned a scholarship due to her academic excellence, while Abigail attended the school because her parents could easily afford the school fees. Despite their different upbringings, their paths were destined to cross. The day Vivian stepped into St. Michael's Academy was one of the proudest moments of her life. She had worked tirelessly to earn her scholarship, her parents smiling with pride as she walked through the gates of the high status school, dressed in her uniform and with her books that marked her as a student of one of the city's elite institutions. Vivian knew she could have to work hard to prove herself in the new environment, but she was ready for the challenge. Abigail, on the other hand, treated school like a playground. She was used to getting whatever she wanted and expected no less here. Her parents had pulled things together to get her into the academy, but Abigail had no interest in her studies. She was more interested in flaunting her wealth and status to her classmates. From the moment they met, Abigail disliked Vivian. She couldn't stand that someone like Vivian, who came from a poor background, could attend the same school as her. Abigail was always mocking Vivian's second-hand clothes, reminding her that she didn't belong in a place reserved for the wealthy. Abigail's friends followed her lead, bullying Vivian whenever they got the chance. Yet, Vivian never fought back. She remained focused on her studies, determined to make her parents proud. The harder Abigail pushed, the more Vivian did well in her studies, rising to the top of her class. This only angered Abigail more. How could a girl who had none of the privileges she enjoyed be so successful? Abigail's jealousy turned into bitterness. Teachers adored Vivian for her kindness, discipline, and hard work, while they were always frustrated by Abigail's laziness and arrogance. Despite the differences in their performance, they couldn't help but notice how similar the two girls looked. In fact, many commented on the resemblance between Abigail and Vivian's mother, Mrs. Obin. They laughed it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted in some minds. As times passed, the gossip about the girls' resemblance grew. Vivian's mother noticed it too. Mrs. Obin began to feel unease about the comment she heard at school meetings. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself it was ridiculous, but deep down, a nagging feeling began to grow. Could there have been a mistake when Vivian was born? Could her real daughter be the sports Abigail? On the other side of the city, Mrs. Ajiman, Abigail's mother, was beginning to have similar doubts. Abigail's behavior didn't match that of her family's values. The Ajimans humbled themselves even though they had money. But Abigail was rude, disrespect, and had no interest in giving back to society. Mrs. Ajimai couldn't shake the feelings that Abigail was different, not just in personality, but in appearance. She remembered the other baby born the same night Abigail came into the world and how there had been some confusion in the nursery. One day, after another unpleasant encounter with Abigail, Mrs. Ajiman decided to deeper. She quietly hired a private investigator to look into the birth records from the night, hoping to either confirm or put to rest her growing doubts. Months passed, and the investigator finally uncovered the truth. The hospital records from the night Abigail and Vivian were born confirmed a terrible mistake had been made. The girls had been switched at birth. This shocked Mrs. Achiman. She was heartbroken. How could she tell Abigail the truth? How could Vivian react, knowing that the life she was supposed to have was stolen from her? Both mothers decided to meet in secret to discuss the matter before confronting the girls. When Mrs. Obin and Mrs. Ajimai met, the room was filled with tension. They sat in silence for what seems like hours before Mrs. Ajimai finally spoke. "We have to tell them," she said softly, tears welling her in her eyes. "They deserve to know the truth." Mrs. Obin nodded, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the daughter she had raised wasn't hers by blood, but she loved Vivian with all her heart. She couldn't imagine life without her. Still, they agreed the girls had to be told. The two mothers met with their husbands and broke the news. Both families were in shock. Mr. Ajimai, a proud man, struggled with the idea that his real daughter had grown up in poverty while his wealth had pampered the wrong child. Mr. Obey, though saddened by the truth, knew that he had to approach the situation very well. They all agreed that Vivian and Abigail needed to know the truth. One fateful afternoon, Vivian and Abigail were called to a meeting with both families. They had no idea what was about to happen as they sat across from each other. The tension in the room was unbearable. "There is something we need to tell you both," Mrs. Obin began. Her voice was shaking. "When you were born, there was a mistake at the hospital." Vivian's heart beat. She listened to the truth, her world spinning as the weight of the truth settled in. She wasn't an Obin by blood. The people who had raised her, loved her, weren't her biological parents. Abigail, on the other hand, exploded in anger. "You mean I haven't been living with the wrong family this whole time? Then, or do you want to tell me my mother and my father are poor? No way. I'm not supposed to be poor." The spoiled girl ran away from the room, leaving the parents confused. Vivian, ever calm, couldn't speak. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the family she had called her own for so long. The Ajimans were her biological parents, but they were strangers to her. Abigail stormed out of the room, unable to process the truth. She had never been good at facing reality, and this was too much for her to handle. Vivian, however, sat quietly, trying to make sense of everything. I'm sorry, Vivian, Mrs. Ajimai said. We never knew. If we had, we could have. Vivian interpreted her. It's not your fault, she said, but I don't know what to do now. I love my parents. She looked at Mr. and Mrs. Obeng with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Obeng broke down, pulling Vivian into a tight hug. You will, you will always be our daughter, no matter what. Over the next few months, both families worked through the complicated emotion that came with the truth.
Abigail, though furious at first, eventually began to come to terms with the fact that her upbringing hadn't been all that defined her. She grudgingly started visiting the Obengs, though her attitude remained a challenge. Vivian, on the other hand, was welcomed into the Argument family with open arms, though it was difficult for her to adjust to the world of wealth and privilege. She missed the simplicity of her life with the Obengs, but slowly, she began to build a relationship with her biological parents. It wasn't easy for either girl. Abigail struggled with the idea of being related to a poor family, while Vivian found herself caught between two worlds. But over time, they both grew. Abigail learned the value of humility, slowly shedding her arrogance, while Vivian embraced the opportunities she had been given. In the end, the switch that had defined their early lives no longer held them captive. They were free to forge their own paths, shaped not by wealth or status, but by the love and lessons of both their families. As they graduated from high school, both girls stood at a crossroads. Abigail, no longer the spoiled child she once was, had matured over the years. The truth about her origins had forced her to reflect on who she was beyond her wealth. While she had initially resented the Obengs, she grew to appreciate their strength and resilience. Spending time with them, she saw a different kind of richness in life, one filled with hard work, humility, and love, rather than material possessions. Though her relationship with them was still awkward, Abigail was beginning to let go of her entitlement. Vivian, on the other hand, had blossomed. The Argument's wealth gave her access to opportunities she had only dreamed of. They were eager to support her ambitions, sending her to prestigious summer programs and introducing her to influential circles. However, she never forgot where she came from. She spent most of her weekends at the Obeng small home, helping them with chores and enjoying their warm, simple life. Vivian had come to realize that wealth could open doors, but it couldn't replace the love and values that had shaped her upbringing. As graduation day approached, both girls found themselves reflecting on the journey they had been through. It was a bright and sunny day as students gathered on the school field for their graduation ceremony. Abigail sat beside her friends, still a part of the wealthy crowd, but something had changed. She wasn't the loud, arrogant girl who used to dominate conversations with tales of her family's money. Instead, she sat quietly, thinking about how far she had come and how much further she had to go. Vivian was seated on the other side of the field, surrounded by her fellow scholarship students. She had been chosen as the class valedictorian, a testament to her hard work and dedication. Her parents, both sets of them, sat in the audience, their hearts swelling with pride. As the ceremony began, Abigail glanced at Vivian and caught her eye. For a brief moment, there was an understanding between them. Despite everything, they were connected in a way that no one else could understand. Their lives had been intertwined by fate, and while they were not close friends, there was a mutual respect that had developed over time. When it was Vivian's turn to give her valedictory speech, she stood confidently at the podium. She looked out at the crowd, her heart racing as she prepared to share her thoughts. "Good morning, everyone," she began. "Today, we celebrate not just our academic achievements, but the journeys we've all been on. For some of us, it's been a journey of privilege and ease. For others, it's been one of struggle. But no matter where we come from, we are all here because we worked for it, because we believed in something greater for ourselves. Vivian paused, her eyes scanning the faces in the audience. She could see the Obengs and the arguments sitting together, a reminder of the two worlds she now belonged to. I've learned that our circumstances don't define us, she continued. What defines us is how we choose to respond to them. We can let our challenges break us, or we can use them to become stronger. We can let privilege blind us, or we can use it to help others. Her words were met with applause, but Vivian wasn't finished. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. I stand before you today as someone who has lived two very different lives. I grew up in a modest home, with parents who taught me the value of hard work and humility. But I recently discovered that I was born into wealth. That discovery changed everything and nothing. Because, in the end, it's not about where we come from, but who we become. The crowd fell silent, her words sinking in. Abigail, sitting in the front row, felt a lump in her throat. For the first time in her life, she understood what Vivian was talking about. We can't change our past, but we can decide what to do with the future, Vivian concluded. And as we live here today, I hope we all choose to make the most of what we've been given, whether it's a lot or a little. The audience erupted in applause as Vivian finished her speech and stepped down from the podium. Her heart was pounding, but she felt at peace. She had spoken her truth, and that was all that mattered. After graduation, both girls stood at the threshold of new beginnings. Abigail, now more grounded, decided to pursue a career in social work. She wanted to help those who didn't have the privileges she had taken for granted most of her life. Her time with the Obengs had shown her a side of life she had never understood, and she felt compelled to give back. Vivian, with the support of both her families, was headed to a top university on a full scholarship. She planned to study law, driven by a passion to fight for justice and fairness for those who couldn't afford it. Her journey from poverty to wealth had given her a unique perspective, and she wanted to use it to make a difference in the world. As they prepared to leave for their respective paths, Vivian and Abigail met one last time. They stood on the steps of the school, looking out over the field where they had spent so many years. Well, Abigail said, breaking the silence, I guess this is it. Vivian nodded. Yeah, I guess so. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was too much history between them, too many complicated emotions to express in a few words. I just want to say, I'm sorry, Abigail finally said, her voice soft. For how I treated you before. I was wrong. Vivian smiled gently. It's okay. We've both learned a lot. Abigail nodded, looking relieved. Good luck, Vivian. I mean that. You too, Abigail, Vivian replied. I think you'll do great things. With that, they parted ways, not as enemies, but as two young women who had grown from their experiences. They were not close friends, but they understood each other in a way no one else could. Years later, the story of Vivian and Abigail became well known in their city. People were fascinated by the tale of the two girls who had been switched at birth, only to discover the truth and return to their rightful families. But more than that, they were inspired by how the girls had handled the revelation. Vivian went on to become a successful lawyer, known for her work in defending the underprivileged. She never forgot the lessons she had learned from both her families, and she used her platform to advocate for those who needed it most. Abigail, too, found her calling. She became a leading figure in community development, using her wealth and influence to create opportunities for those less fortunate. The spoiled, selfish girl she had once been was gone, replaced by a woman who understood the value of compassion and humility. In the end, both girls had been given the chance to rewrite their stories. And they had chosen to make the most of it. The truth, once revealed, had not torn their lives apart. Instead, it had set them free. The end.